Hello everyone and welcome to our session. I just want to do a test. Can everyone hear me all right? You just indicate in the chat box if you can hear. Okay, super, fantastic. Well, let's continue on then to our next slide, which is the map. Where in the world are you? If you could, on the left side, take the starburst and put it to where you're located, we can see where everyone's from. I'll give everybody a minute to do that. Okay. Looks like we have East Coast and West Coast well represented. Okay, today I'm going to talk a little bit about benefits and challenges in homeschool education in the United States. My name is Gaudino, and my interest in this topic is several-fold. I have served as 5 years as an associate professor at West Liberty University, which is in the state of West Virginia, and some of my research has revolved around homeschooling. I didn't know much about homeschooling as an educator. I was a teacher, then a principal, then an assistant superintendent, then a university professor, and never learned a lot about that in my courses. But really my first introduction was when one of my best friends from childhood decided to homeschool her children. We've known each other since kindergarten, went all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade together. And she lives in a very rural part of Pennsylvania, and any school that she would have chosen for her children, whether it be public or private or parochial, would have been at least a 45-minute drive, and she really struggled with the idea of putting her 5-year-old on a bus for 45 minutes, particularly in the wintertime. And so she started looking at homeschooling, and we did some talking, and she did more investigating. And now she's been homeschooling for about 10 years, 3 children, and they are doing very, very well. She's completely dedicated to it. It has really been my pleasure to watch how this has grown in their family and the tremendous success that her family has seen. So that was in part what interested me to do some research to find out a little bit more about what does the literature say about homeschooling, what kind of studies have been done. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on, again, the benefits and challenges in homeschool education as identified in historical and current writing on the topic. Of course, I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of opinions and feelings and experiences that surround homeschool education. I am neither endorsing nor discouraging homeschool education in this presentation. I'm not disputing any aspect of it, rather just presenting information that is available in the literature. And I hope that anyone who views and listens to this finds that information to be helpful. So a little bit about the history of homeschooling education. It began really as a fringe movement in the early 20th century when public schooling began to take religion completely out of schools. And parents who wanted their children to have exposure to a particular type of religious value sought to keep their children at home where they could incorporate that religious value into the curriculum and into the everyday teaching. Early roots show that the students who were in this type of education may or may not have had exposure to all of the subject material. Certainly there was no standardized curriculum and no internet. And so there was some, I guess, question as to how good the schooling was, you know, in those very early days. Were the students getting everything that they would have gotten had they been in a more traditional school? But really, we can no longer consider it a fringe movement when we look at in the early 2000s between 1.2 million and 1.7 million students, kindergarten through 12th grade in the United States, were being schooled. And just to give you an idea of how many that is, that's larger than the New York City public school system and about the size of LA and Chicago combined. That fact is really really amazing, and a lot of people don't realize that there are this many students who are being homeschooled in the United States. And one of the things that the authors tell us is that that number's on the rise. So those statistics are from the early 2000s, over a decade ago, and they are not current. So there's more, even more than that, being homeschooled today in the United States. So why this growth? There have been a lot of studies that have been done and various attributes that have come up, from parents feeling that there's been an increase in violence in schools, parents being dissatisfied with schools, concerned about the environment, concerned about the overall academic instruction, and a preference for the religious and moral instruction that may not be provided in traditional schools. So that's the one common factor that has been part of homeschooling education since the earliest days. And again, there are similar characteristics of homeschoolers. They include religion, ethnicity, family structure, income, education of parents. One of the things that we'll see later on in the slides is that homeschoolers really represent a certain niche, I guess, in American society. It doesn't represent American society as a whole. But one of the things that we can say is, why the growth has occurred, and part of the reason of that is the internet and the availability of resources that people have today that they didn't have a decade or two ago. So the literature says there are some distinct advantages to homeschooling, and in fact the literature cites more advantages than disadvantages. The key advantage that's cited in many sources is increased standardized test scores. And many authors agreeing that is a key benefit that has been realized by many students. You can see here students scored in the 80th percentile on standardized achievement, and that achievement of students seems to be directly linked to the amount of education that the mother has had, that being that typically the mother is the one who's homeschooling. Of course, it doesn't have to be, but that there's a key relationship between the amount of schooling of the mother or the teacher in a homeschooling environment and the achievement of the students. So high standardized test scores, one-on-one instruction, allowing a student to move at his or her own pace and ability level, all of these things, as well as individual attention, are things that homeschooling has, according to the literature, as advantages. And here you can see from McReynolds, students tend to score higher than public school children on standardized tests, AP exams, SAT, the ACT. Homeschoolers attend college at a higher rate than public school students. One case study that was done with a woman by the last name of Poole, she talks about the benefits that she personally felt as a homeschool student. And she says, and this is a quote, "With one-on-one instruction, our inquisitive minds never soured from monotonous hours of squirming in class waiting for slower students. When we mastered the required material, the remainder of the day was our own." And she believes that homeschool communities supplied an optimal solution for her personally, and that the personalized mentorship that she received, she could otherwise not have gotten in a different type of educational setting. She's very proud that she scored in the 99th percentile on the PSAT, and did extremely well on the SAT as well. And from her perspective, again, talking about the advantages, she personally, as a homeschooler, felt that the advantages to her were really significant. Lastly, an advantage that society realizes beyond the academic achievement is a financial one. According to LIPS, American education system saved taxpayers about $9 billion each year due to homeschooling. That's sometimes the other side of homeschooling and education in general, I guess, that we don't always think about, is the not just the academic gains, but what is the financial cost. So it's interesting for people to know that homeschooling as a whole saves American society a lot of money. Of course, on the other side, there are challenges to homeschooling. As we could say, there are advantages and challenges to any form of education whatsoever. First of all, research shows homeschooling is not for everyone. Parents who have full-time jobs and limited social and financial resources can find it very difficult to homeschool. Kennedy tells us the median family income, now this was in '97, so it's a little dated, but the median family income for those who homeschooled was around $43,000 a year. 88% of the time the mothers are the ones doing the teaching, 16% of the mothers working outside the home, about 14 hours a week. Average but significant 5% of the income in homeschooled households earned by the mothers, most of it being earned by the fathers, which means that overall there's a potential decrease in family income. Rather than having two parents who are working, having one parent, typically the mother, staying home and homeschooling. So there can be a challenge financially. There can be a challenge socially too for someone, a mother in this case, who might be accustomed to having that full-time job, and then suddenly being in the home all the time, or at least a lot more than what she had experienced previously. There's also the potential for variable experience in homeschooling. And I'm sure if you're attending this conference, you have heard or seen or experienced yourself a variety of homeschooling experiences. The people who, as I mentioned earlier, my friend who homeschools, who are very, very dedicated to this and make it an excellent experience because they do everything that it takes to make education excellent. And on the other hand, I've seen people who look at it as, well, it's a way to stay at home in my pajamas all day long. Well, there's the variation in experience. So it can certainly be a challenge for students to learn if they don't have that parental figure who is giving them the excellent opportunities that are out there. So let's look a little bit at the research here. Mackey studied a group, and he stressed strong moral code, academic achievement, social skills. His study agrees with others that homeschooling families tend to have two parents in residence, or well-educated, tend to be Caucasian and Christian. He measured the study against the Department of Education's list of factors, and he determined that homeschooled children were predicted to perform with success as adjudged by the typical barometers of academic achievement. In other words, typically standardized tests. But Mackey talks about risk factors: poverty, single-parent family, lack of English spoken in the home, a variety of things that could potentially cause this variation in homeschooling experience. So I think, going back to what the other author said, it's not for everyone. Another author agrees that it can be difficult to quantify these advantages and challenges. You know, most of the research that's been done on homeschooling is qualitative, you know, the quality of people's experience. But determining the exact quantity can be a challenge. And he gives a great example here. If a child is reading at grade 3, then the question he asked is whether the child is enrolled in what grade, 1, 3, or 5. So if they're doing a grade 3 writing test, but technically they're enrolled in, let's say, grade 5, how exactly do we quantify that? Of course, we can say that they're probably achieving above grade level. It can cause some difficulty in calculation, just something to be aware of. And you can see here what he did is he, in his study, transformed scores in a way that hopefully it made it more equivalent and a little bit more accurate in terms of a prediction. So again, challenges in quantifying, no uniform curriculum from state to state, sometimes even from household to household, depends on what state you're in and what the requirements are. Standardized tests in some states are mandatory, in some states they're voluntary. Accountability for homeschooling varies drastically from state to state. Demographics definitely play a large role in homeschooling. I think I mentioned my friend who lives in a very rural part of Pennsylvania, and that was a large part of her decision to homeschool, was just the location. And I think the other thing that needs to be brought up is that difficulty in quantifying is that homeschoolers don't represent American society as a whole. So it can be difficult to compare the achievement of homeschool children with children in the general population of the United States. So a couple conclusions that we can draw, again, just from this literature. One is that homeschool began as a fringe movement in the early 20th century, and parents sought this type of schooling in order to ensure that their children were exposed to certain religious values that had been removed from public education. Homeschooling is no longer a fringe movement by any means. There are approximately 2 million children that are homeschooled in the United States. Again, that's more than the children in New York City public schools, and it would be equivalent to the number of children in Chicago and Los Angeles public schools combined, and those numbers continue to rise. Homeschool families state specific reasons for opting for homeschool. There are quite a variety of those. There's definitely more literature citing advantages than disadvantages or challenges to homeschool, but the difficulty remains in quantifying the success of homeschool children. Homeschool children do not demographically represent all children throughout the United States. So again, it works well for some, but we cannot say that it would work well for everyone. It's difficult to gauge social aspects of homeschooling in general, and the amount of social contact that children who are homeschooling have with other children. Although case studies tell us that, again, homeschooling done well provides students with excellent academic opportunities as well as social opportunities and learning in a social context. Of course, there are distinct advantages and disadvantages to homeschool education, and part of the disadvantages lie in this potential for a variable experience. Again, from state to state, requirements are so different. From household to household, the feeling is homeschooling is so different. And I guess no matter where you are, whether it's homeschooling or public education or parochial education, the teacher makes the difference. And a good teacher in a homeschooling environment is going to make that a great environment, is what the literature tells us. But it takes that dedication and that commitment. Okay, just some references if you want to look up more information about any of these points. And there is my contact information. And I'll just wait for a minute if anyone would like to add anything to the chat, any questions or any other talking points. Sure. Here's the references. Let's see, Peggy said, did I get a chance to be interviewed for the homeschooling documentary? No, I haven't. I'm not sure what that is, but I would love to have more information if you want to send it my way. What sort of homeschool research would you like to see getting done? I am primarily a qualitative researcher. I'm interested in the quality of education. And again, my introduction to homeschooling was through this friend of mine who's been homeschooling for the past 10 years. I think case studies are wonderful and I would love to see more case studies done of homeschooling families that show all aspects. You know, in getting to watch her family and her students, her children, all three children, grow through homeschooling has been really, really remarkable. And as an educator and as a researcher, I'd read all of this stuff about homeschooling, but then to see it play out live has really been fascinating. So I would love to see more qualitative interviews and case studies done. Okay, I'm looking at the question here. I have to scroll up and down. As homeschoolers, people often tell us, well, it's okay that you homeschool, but not if other people do because they won't be good at it. How could research be used to show that this isn't the case? I'm not sure that I totally understand that question. What research does tell us, again, is that the potential for a varied experience in homeschooling is great, and the reason it's varied is it depends so much on the teacher. So I would think that research might indicate to us what types of situations, family situations, parental situations, would be more successful for homeschooling, and which ones might be less successful. So if I'm not understanding your question, please put it back up in the chat box. But based on the research, that is how I would respond to that question. People think that only highly educated parents can be homeschooled. The research, and I can really only speak to that here, does not indicate that a person has to be highly educated. It definitely shows that if the mother or the teacher has more advanced education, that they tend to be more successful. But it doesn't really define advanced. You know, it doesn't say you have to have a master's degree or what have you. Yeah, and I agree here. It would be interesting to see if the parent's education influences the future success of the student. Back to the question that someone had posed about what type of research would be done, I think it would be fascinating to have a longitudinal study done, a study done over a long time, to see what the effects of homeschooling are as students get into college and then beyond in their life. I think that aligns with this comment. So we see in the research that homeschooling students are doing well on standardized tests, and it would be interesting to see how that does or does not play out at the university setting and then as they enter the workforce. Did any of your research address unschooling? No, it didn't. I really can't discuss that. I'm not as familiar with that. What is the major pushback that prevents parents to homeschool? I did not find an answer to that in the research. Certainly there are lots of opinions. I think if we really want, you know, again, a research-based answer, we would have to have more research in that area. And thanks to Suki, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, for this comment about your own experience in seeing parental education, educational attainment, and how that relates to the child's educational attainment. It would be interesting to see if there's a difference between homeschooled and schooled kids. I agree. Definitely a lot of room for research on this topic. Here's my contact information. I am the founder and editor of the Excellence in Education Journal. We are an open, free, online journal that is published once yearly, and would be glad to have articles, stories, ideas from people in any aspect of education, homeschooling education included. So please visit our website, and hope that you will enjoy reading the journal and perhaps even sending an article our way. So thanks so much to everyone who attended today. Thanks to Steve for setting up this wonderful conference, and thanks to Peggy George for being a fantastic moderator. Glad to have you today, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.